you know, what we're our role at NIST is to try to take climate data and help address some of the gaps that keep it from being directly applied for infrastructure design or evaluation. And so I don't think there's anything new on here, just some restatement of facts that are familiar to everybody. We have that gap, that's why we're all together. Climate science often provides data on projected mean values, temperatures being one example. But however, our design criteria require extreme value data for design, since we design it for a service life. And we've been using 50 years for a long time, but I'm hearing 75 and 100 years for this climate projections more and more. And our national model codes and standards, probably one of the biggest needs is not only the data, but how to characterize non-stationarity as we move forward. Again, everybody here knows that. And then just, the general statement about why we need to do this to reduce impacts and improve overall performance and resilience. So, the issue of compounding events gets mentioned a lot. And one of the things that I see mentioned, and I don't know how much this group's going to go into it, but I think we all think about it, is when we talk about changing conditions, it's not just the rain, the temperature, the winds. It's also social changes, economic changes, changes in populations, and then changes in infrastructure capacity. And so all of these have to be woven into thinking about how climate may affect our communities and their ability to respond and recover. I know a lot of our codes and standards focus on individual infrastructure systems, but this bigger picture perspective is helpful towards really thinking through the goals for those individual facilities. So NIST is working on two activities right now. This first one, we have Ben and Jennifer Goupil participating in terms of the planning. We have a contract with ICF to help us. And so some of you may be familiar with the Community Resilience Planning Guide that NIST put out. Gosh, it's been about 8 years now. And when we issued that document, I think climate was being discussed, but it wasn't really being embraced like it is now. So it really doesn't address it. We would like to provide some updated guidance for communities on how to address climate as they're doing their resilience planning. So the way that we're looking at doing this is holding 3 workshops. They'll all be virtual. And the purpose is to identify what we're calling leading practices for a range of climate issues. Because there isn't national guidance, communities or regions are basically developing guidance for themselves. So we want to go in and take a look at what some of these leaders are doing. And we just met yesterday, and the current plan is to bring 2 or 3 communities addressing similar hazards into a single workshop so that we can identify commonalities, differences, maybe criteria that need to be considered, and get a more nuanced perspective on how some of these different climate-related hazards are being addressed. And then I've just listed here the examples, the types of climate impacted hazards that are being considered. And I just added a note at the bottom that currently our guide is very focused on discrete events. They happen, they're done, you recover. But climate's bringing this intersection of discrete and chronic events, and we feel like we really need to start addressing that. as well, because the communities are certainly addressing it. So I'll just stop quickly here. I don't know if there's any questions on this particular activity.
Well, I guess, Terry, so yeah, you've got another slide to go.
I have one more.
Yeah. Just real quickly on this one, I had an opportunity to talk with Adam Parrish yesterday. I don't know if Adam mentioned it. I think it was before your call. And, he expressed a desire to try to leverage some of the work that we're doing here. I'm happy to have that conversation. I guess I'm kind of looking to you, to give us some signal, or me some signal, or this group some signal as to, what your expectations are, what your, how you would want to try to promote that conversation, because, this group isn't in a position to manage your contractor, nor should we. So, I just want to make sure we've got kind of clear lines of communication.
Thank you. That would be great. And the way the virtual workshops are going to be set up, just to give you a sense, is that the maximum participation will be 100. That's just the capacity that they're going to have. And this will be for the general presentations and kind of large group discussions. We are then going to go into breakouts, and it's going to be reduced to 50 at that point, and mostly for managing things. And again, the idea here is to come up with a draft that I would love, as well as participation in the workshop, having review by this group. I think the more review we get, the better, to just make sure that what we'd like to put forward is, I'm going to call this interim guidance, to help communities and maybe inform some of the codes and standards work. Certainly, it's not meant to be an end unto itself. I see it as a stepping stone. So,
excellent, thank you.
Okay, so the other activity is we started this just this year as well. Both of these are new activities. Is developing a report on research needed, which we at NIST refer to as a roadmap, for incorporating climate projections into codes and standards for the built environment. And so we are looking at the range of hazards. Some have direct impacts, some have indirect impacts, such as you might wonder about earthquake, but landslides and liquefaction can certainly be affected, and are often associated with earthquake events. And so right now we are basically reviewing the current literature out there. We're looking at what's known about characterizing climate projections, what's been done so far, some of the work we've talked about, adaptation or mitigation for design into the future. We've also mentioned the non-stationarity aspect. And then also considering some of those social aspects that I mentioned on the previous slide. So we want to identify specific action items and research activities. Again, we will have a workshop associated with this. We will have draft documents that we will be putting out for review. The purpose of this is to inform the entire community, not just NIST. And hopefully it will be helpful to ASCE and others that are working in this space. So I think I'll just stop there. But those are the two major activities that we have going on.
Excellent. Thank you, Terry.
Let me stop sharing then.
All right. So questions for Terry? Allison, go ahead.
All right. I'm not a regular Zoom user. It takes a while to find all the buttons. Terry, I did have a question. If you could just re-clarify what you mean by the built environment and infrastructure. So, and sort of the scope of what you are considering and perhaps what you're not considering, just to be able to triangulate what you're saying here.
Okay. So the built environment is a broad encompassing term that includes buildings and what's sometimes separately referred to as infrastructure systems. I think the vocabulary sometimes gets a little confusing.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what you mean when you say buildings,
Yeah.
but when you say infrastructure systems, sometimes people include buildings, sometimes they don't. They tend to be networked systems for water, power, transportation, communication. And the built environment is just kind of a broad term
Yep.
talking about all of those things.
Okay.
We've had some folks push for us to include, green infrastructure. We haven't gotten there yet, mostly because that's just not a strong capability in our wheelhouse. But we recognize that that can be an important part of planning, whether or not it's considered built environment. I might leave to others to tell me if they think it's included or not. That's certainly another area that a lot of communities are actively looking at. Yeah.
Thank you for kind of helping me make sure I'm not misinterpreting anything you're saying.
Okay, sure.
Other questions for Terri? Well, I guess, Terri, I mean, again, this is, these meetings are intended to be somewhat informal, so I'm not going to hold you to anything or ask you to make policy on the fly. But
Good.
obviously, there is a growing interest in understanding how the natural environment provides services and interacts with what would traditionally be the built environment, especially for flood risk management and other aspects. Do you see, because like for many of these cities, if you're talking about their comprehensive approach to stormwater management, they have to take that into account. So do you see the potential that NIST might evolve, or is that something, I mean, ASCE is obviously putting a significant emphasis on that going forward, especially at the Inspire conference. And so I'm going to ask Bilal to talk a little bit more about that when we're done here. But do you see that as evolving, or do you think NIST will probably recognize the role of the natural environment but stay more focused on the traditional constructed environment?
Well, for the near term, it's definitely going to be the latter because we just don't have expertise in that area. And it probably make more sense to leverage or collaborate with those that do have that expertise rather than trying to rapidly stand up something that we really haven't addressed.
Yeah, no, that sounds like good governance.
And then I have just a question, maybe a comment and question. Thank you, Terri, for the presentation. I mean, at the present, we are doing some work which is related to community resilience, and I think the Applied Economics Office is involved in it. It's on wildfire for California utilities, and basically the focus in there is how to include the risk attitude of a community in decision making, so that more will be shared with the group about this. But we have some draft concept. And it has a lot of complexities because you have so many players and lawyers and economists and so on involved in it. So that could I could see that maybe could be there could be some synergy in there with the community resilience guide. The second item is I mean, ASC CAC has a subcommittee which is chaired by John Dye, and that one is looking at basically codes and standards, ASCE, and summarizing where are the critical items within each code and standard and so on. So maybe you're aware of that group. It's a subcommittee.
No, I'm not.
Yeah. And they've done, good amount of work. So they have a elaborate spreadsheet actually with different codes and standards and issues and so on. So maybe connecting with them, there might be some benefit in there. The question that I have is, are you looking beyond ASCE? At the present, I'm working with the Safety Engineering and Risk Division of ASME. And I know there is interest within ASME to look at their codes and standards. Also, I think ASC and IEEE, they held a meeting, which I participated in with, and it was with the IEEE president, who's currently at George Mason. I think he's professor on the faculty at George Mason, and they are looking on something similar. The focus there is on power distribution, power generation. So I wasn't sure what's the scope of what the codes and standards you'll be looking at. Is it civil or beyond that?
It is primarily civil at this point, Bilal, but the excuse me, the when you mentioned ASME, I don't know. I understand the reliability aspects there. I'm just not sure how much what we are doing would apply there. You probably could help me better understand that. But we are interested broadly in building and infrastructure systems, particularly from a community planning perspective. But as you know, a lot of these other infrastructure systems don't have consensus codes and standards like we think of for buildings. A lot of them are either industry driven or else they're regulatory in nature. And so it's a much more complex environment is what we found trying to come up with guidance when you run into regulators and industry standards.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly complex. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in mechanical engineering, the group that I dealt with for many years is in the power generation, I'll say power plants, cooling, sea water level, temperature changes could affect intakes. I mean, there are some, most of the time you'll find that when they deal with siting and foundation and building and so on, all of it, they will refer to ASCE. So in their codes and in their code and standards, in a sense. So I think there is maybe some items that could be added in there. But I'm happy, to share with the group as we make progress on any of those fronts. We could bring it to the task force here.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate your letting me know about all those activities.
I guess kind of along a similar line, for example, we've had some interactions with a group out of the University of Minnesota led by Heidi Roop, who published a document fairly recently. I think it got a lot of attention, primarily about work that they've done with ASHRAE and then just the whole discussion of like why engineers aren't making more use of climate projections going into the future. And so I guess the question I have is, like, obviously, if we're looking across the whole community, there are a number of different organizations. There's a number of different systems that are involved in that community resilience. ASCE, as you said, covers certain aspects of it, like buildings. But, other than maybe ASHRAE and maybe ASME, maybe AASHTO, that's the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, something like that. That's really kind of who promulgates a lot of the design standards for roadways, et cetera. Are there other groups that NIST is working with that maybe we should at least be tracking in this space?
Well, we do have our building energy and environment division. They work with ASHRAE a lot because they're doing building envelopes and heating and ventilation systems. And we have another group that's at the other end of the spectrum. They're doing greenhouse gas measurements, but yeah, that's more at the basic science level.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess that's, if you think of or you encounter other groups that do codes and standards or something relevant, provide guidance documents that would have an impact on community resilience, we're trying to kind of at least have a list of those so that we're aware of their existence and what they do. And then we can have a discussion about what would be an appropriate interaction with them.
Dan, if I may just add,
please.
NSF, recently they sent what they call Dear Colleague letter. I dropped the heading in chat. Basically, they're focusing on, I think, civil infrastructure research for climate adaptation. So I think there might be, and I know they are keenly interested in funding workshops and so on. So this is not only for the NIST effort, but it could be for our pursuits. I have some contacts in some of the programs there. I'm sure some of you do too as well.
Okay.